an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Haunting of Bly Manor, Season 1, Episode 9, The Beast in the Jungle. In this episode, things get wrapped up as a whole fairly early on in the episode, but then we have to watch the lingering effects, and that's pretty tough. I'm back and forth on this one too. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. And Ashleigh, I don't think that you're here in the chat right now. No, you are. Hi, Ashleigh. Hello. I am really glad that you commissioned this because I have a feeling this is the kind of thing I would have intended to watch forever and never actually gotten around to if somebody didn't specifically commission it. Like I said, because I'm a giant scaredy cat. So I really appreciate you giving me that nudge. And after this is over, Ashleigh has continued commissioning and we will be transitioning into sex education, which I actually don't know what platform that's on. And I don't know anything about the show as a whole. So I'll go in totally blind for that. Netflix also, she says, awesome. So this episode is... It's very similar for me as the last one, where I like a lot of elements of it and I see what they were trying to do, but I don't think it entirely works. And there are, I feel, some small changes that could have been made and choices that they made that I don't understand. And the changes wouldn't really even be that dramatic in some cases, and I feel like it would have helped a lot in terms of this feeling a little bit more cohesive. The issue for me, for this finale, is I don't like that we have so much time with the people from Bly, and then we are done with them after 15 minutes. And it's just pretty much about Jamie and Danny. I like the idea of the relationship between Jamie and Danny. I don't quite feel the chemistry between them. I really want to. I really, really do. So I'm sort of like willing to overlook it, even though it's not quite there for me, because I want it to be there. But even setting that aside, it's bonkers to me that we're going to have these two kids get like outright possessed. And then we're going to deal with it by cutting away and having like a third party just tell us later they don't remember anything. For me, I thought that was the point of what they were trying to do in this show, especially when we get to find out what the history is with Peter Quint, is that this show is about processing and dealing with trauma. And the idea that the children just forget something that's incredibly traumatic, I don't know if the show is trying to be like, well, see, their uncle finally stepped up and decided to protect them and do something to like take them in and take responsibility for them. And so they were protected from the fallout of the trauma in a way that Peter wasn't, and in some ways in a way that Danny wasn't, because we see that her mother was not really there for her. But I don't really feel like that's what they are doing. If that was the intention, I don't think it came across. It just really felt like the show decided that they didn't want the kids to be a factor after a point because Danny's meant to just have sacrificed herself. And so it becomes all about her after that. And everybody is just too involved in this story for it to then boil down to only one person. And for that to wind up being, 40 minutes out of the 50-minute finale. So I'm really a bit saddened, actually, that we don't find out how things went with them. We don't find out how they process things. We don't ever like see the moment where her uncle tells her that he's actually her father. And there's a sense in like, once we actually see what this framing device is all about, it turns out that this was Jamie the whole time telling the story. And we really like the conversation that Jamie, Danny, and Owen had. He says they don't really remember Hannah. They just remember her as a person, like they recognized her in the photo as a person who used to stay with them at Bly, but they don't remember anything about her. Why? Like, she didn't die long enough ago that they were infants, because what I was thinking initially was like, oh, if you're a ghost, they just don't remember you. But Hannah was only a ghost for a few months, maybe a couple of years. I feel like it was just a few months though, right? Yeah, it was just a few months. Why would the memory of somebody who was advocating for them and important to them and kind to them, why would her memory be just erased from their mind? I don't understand what the advantage is meant to be of that or the reason for it. So then when we have the framing device and Jamie's speaking to what turns out to be Flora, but Flora is her middle name, she doesn't seem to remember Jamie at all. Well, why is Jamie invited to the wedding? She like does a cheers to somebody who is meant to be Owen across the ballroom. Why is she here? Why is he there? If it feels like they don't remember people. She's sitting there having a conversation and there's no indicator that Flora remembers her or knows who she is or anything. So the only explanation there is that she's straight up crashing the wedding, which I don't feel like is what we're supposed to think is going on. All this to say, I don't think the framing device was necessary. I feel the voiceover really took away from a lot of moments that it would have been helped if it was just allowed to unfold in front of us. And I think that the backstory about what happened with Viola and Perdita, it's weird that Jamie knows it and is telling it to us. I don't feel that makes sense. It would, like the idea that I had last episode with cutting the origin story into pieces and placing a piece in front of each episode before you get to the finale and taking most of the voiceover away from it. Then you don't have to believe that Jamie knows the whole backstory. You know it as a viewer, and it doesn't matter if the people at Bly know it. It doesn't matter if Jamie knows it. It doesn't matter if a bunch of people that she's telling the story to know it, because that they don't exist and we've completely done away with that. Now, what I liked was the concept of what Danny did and the way that she is coping with it as an ongoing thing in the rest of the episode. There's a lot of allegories that you could, or not metaphors. There's a lot of metaphors that you could take away from her struggle with what happens. And I'm just going to start from the beginning of the actual episode so that I can, get to things as they occur. Let's see. Ashleigh says, as a family friend, I would assume she was invited by Henry. I mean, I suppose. I just don't understand why because they seem to remember Owen. Why wouldn't they remember Jamie? That I just don't really understand why the memory wipe at all and who qualifies for it and who doesn't. Because the impression that we get when Owen's talking about them is that they remembered him when they had their talk. It's not like, I don't know. Candace says they needed at least one more episode for this to work, showing the children in therapy and things like that. They might repress those memories with the right kind of environment and therapy. See, that was what I was going to say, Candace, is that this felt like it got cut too short. It needed a little bit more time to breathe. Ashleigh says maybe Danny had access to what was left of Viola's memories and shared them with her. Okay, I like that idea. That's a neat idea. I would have liked if we knew that. But again, if the story was told in the way that I said, you wouldn't even need any of this. And I stand by that. That would make it stronger overall. I just think that the voiceover doesn't work most of the time. I feel it takes away. It doesn't explain anything beyond, like, you can put together what's going on as you're watching. We don't need anyone telling us what's going on in the scene, you know? There's a place for a voiceover for me is when you need to hear an internal monologue that a character cannot say out loud. But if the narrator is just telling you what's happening in the scene, then it's very superfluous and it's just sort of like distracting. And the point for me that it really became extremely like, why are you doing it now? Is when we have Danny interrupt just as Flora is about to be pulled into the lake. Because it's like, oh, she spoke the words that she didn't really understand but felt in her bones. And I'm like, I mean, you don't need to tell us that. We saw that she was there when the kids said the words to those ghosts. We know why she knows the words. We know how she could like put together what. You don't need to tell us this. And for me, there was an incredible amount of tension in that moment because I genuinely didn't know how they were going to get Flora out of this. And then they like have this woman talking over it, reminding us that this is just a story and taking me completely away from the moment. So, and one other thing that I have to say, and I know that this is a bit nitpicky, but you all have to have noticed this too. When Viola starts to strangle literally anybody other than Danny, they are dead in 30 seconds. Like 10 seconds, really, most of the time. But Danny gets dragged all the way back into the house and up the stairs. And it takes like a full fucking minute. And she is still alive. And it doesn't... We just needed her to stay alive for this whole thing in order for it to work that Viola saves her. Or no, sorry, that Flora saves her. But why is she the one? Come on. And also, I'm not entirely sure how you guys interpreted this, but when Flora jumps on the bed in an attempt to save Danny, it was filmed, in my opinion, as if she knew what Flora was going to do when she saw her on the bed. She didn't struggle. It just felt like, I know you're looking for your daughter. Here I am, a girl of a similar age, to distract you. But why would Flora know? Is it that they've talked to the ghosts? Is that meant to be what it is? Because I know that like her and Miles are meant to have like had more of a relationship with the ghosts, but they don't seem super able to communicate. Peter Quint gets some information from them, which we hear him like sort of allude to when he's talking to Miss Jessel. But I wasn't sure if he ever shared that with them. Again, if there's like an overlap with memories and stuff, maybe when he possesses Miles, Miles like absorbs some of the information that Peter Quint has gotten. But it is a moment of just sort of like, how can she know that? Who has what information? So, Candace, I was way too invested to be okay with the ending. It felt so rushed and frustrating. The writers are capable of more, and then they did it for the gram. Okay, yeah, that is like low key. That's exactly the correct answer. So the dragging into the house, I had forgotten that is like her pattern. She goes upstairs, she goes to that room looking for her daughter, and then she goes back down to the lake. So for a minute, I thought that they were just straight up taking her down to the lake first thing. And when she starts walking into the house, I was like, what? Why? And then I remembered, oh, of course, she does this like circuit every time. Ashleigh says the ghost kid was communicating with her using the dolls and the dollhouse, so I guess he could have relayed that, maybe. Maybe. I wonder how, though. The dollhouse thing, that is how that was meant to work, right? Is the dolls get moved around by a little kid who's informing her where they are in the house. I feel like I didn't entirely put that together. And then when I was thinking about it after the finale, I remembered the dollhouse and I was like, they didn't explain that. And then I was like, I think they did, actually. It was just not really like super obvious. You just had to put two and two together. So she goes up to the bed. Flora jumps on it. She picks up Flora and forgets about Danny and begins to hum "Oh Willow Whaley" and dance around. Danny is in some really bad shape because she has almost died just now. And we cut to Miles, who is behind a hedge. And he is standing next to the ghost of Miss Jessel. And it's obviously, Peter inside of Miles. And he says to Miss Jessel, "I gave you freedom, and you're letting it drown." And it's a little bit, for me, I don't know if you guys were like doing a wanking motion like I was, but a few minutes later, when Peter Quint appears and he tells Miles he's so sorry, get fucked, sir. Goodbye. I cannot. You are not sorry. What? You're not sorry? What are you talking about? How? No. I don't think so. Anyway, so Flora gets carried into the water. At this point, her Uncle Henry appears and sees Flora being carried away and is like, "Oh, fuck no." Stops the car and runs after the ghost, gets gripped up, and it looks like killed almost instantly. It takes no time at all. And honestly, I was about to be pretty impressed because that's a bit of a Shining move, where you just have somebody that like swans up and you think is going to save the day and then they get fucking taken out in no time at all. And then you have to completely rethink the rescue that you thought was imminent and be like, well, if it's not them, then what the fuck? And I was a little bit bummed that he winds up being resuscitated. Like, I was glad on behalf of the children, but in terms of like storytelling, that would have been a pretty that would have been a bold move, a bold choice. So she gets carried into the water, and this is when Owen and Jamie, they both had like a terrible nightmare, and they come to the house just off of that and get met by Hannah. Now, the episode opens with Hannah, who is caught in this memory with Owen, talking about how she wishes that she had told him that she loved him. This was another weird one for me, because I want more of her and Owen together. I want to have a moment between them. But instead of an actual Hannah and Owen moment, we get Hannah and her memory Owen, and it's acknowledged within the scene that that's just her, not him. And he tells her, "You need to warn us, you need to warn me and help them." And then she is not really helpful at all. She tries to stop Viola. Viola walks right through her. It's the first time, I think, that we have seen Hannah be like incorporeal in the way that ghosts are. She's always been able to sort of interact with the world around her as if she were still alive. And we've never really seen, other than her just vanishing, her be a ghost. So she doesn't do anything there. And then when Jamie and Owen show up, she runs up to them and is like, "They need you at the lake." And I'm like, okay, but they are looking at her like they're not gonna, they don't know what she means. And then they hear Flora screaming and they're like, "Oh shit." And they follow Flora's scream. So Hannah was super not needed there either. They would have gotten out of their car, heard Flora screaming, and then they would have headed her way anyway. I wanted Hannah and Owen to have a moment. She's still sort of corporeal here. And instead, all we get is Uncle Henry being like almost dead. And him chatting with Hannah. And then Hannah vanishing mid-sentence, telling him to tell Owen she's sorry. No! No. No, no, no. The whole opening scene with her talking about how I wish I'd told you I loved you. I wish I loved it. Why can't we have that be an actual conversation? That would have been so much more satisfying. We know already that she loves him and regrets not telling him. We don't need her talking to herself about it. And we don't need her struggling with, oh my God, I want to stay in this memory. We know that. We had a whole episode about how she keeps coming back to this one cherished memory. We're aware. You don't need to do this again. So the fact that, like, there's no sort of closure between the two of them at all, and instead she winds up talking to Henry. What? Like, why? Why? Come on. That's mean. That's a mean-spirited thing to do. So, when they finally come across Henry's body, he begins to do the resuscitation of Henry, and he does eventually get him back. And Jamie is following Danny, who has run into the water, and this is when it comes over her, the idea to invite Viola in. This was weird. I'm not mad about it. I actually sort of like this concept. But what it is, I guess, is, like, I would appreciate y'all's interpretations of why Danny realized that this was the thing to do. Is it just because she literally had no other ideas? Because I wouldn't be mad if that was really it. She just was sitting in an attic tied up watching kids make bargains with ghosts and using this phrasing. And maybe that's just literally the only thing she could think of. And she was like, I guess, okay, let's try it. I wish that, like, I mean, it's hard to know how aware she was of what was actually happening with those bargains, because I don't have a good grip on that, what she thought was going on there. I think she gets it, but it's hard to know. But so there's like a bit of a sense here of she doesn't actually like know what she's asking Viola to do, which makes it like so mean to me, the consequences that she winds up having to live with. It's really awful. So yeah, this is when she says, it's you, it's me, it's us. And when Viola accepts, it looks like she just completely disappears. I'm not sure that that's how it happens in the scene, because it pretty much like seems to cut away from that moment. But also, oh my God, you guys, I forgot about this. Y'all, oh, this makes me even madder though. I was just saying how why can't Owen and Hannah have their final moment where they say goodbye? And do you know what? Owen's in the midst of giving CPR to Henry, and he looks up and there's Miss Jessel. He could see ghosts even if Hannah was incorporeal. It wouldn't have mattered. He could still have seen her just for this moment. Give them that. Why would you do this way? Oh, I'm so pissed off. But yeah, Miss Jessel begins to fade away, and we begin to see all of the other ghosts. Well, not all of them. We get a look at Perdita, and she disappears. She's like looking in the mirror, it seems, sort of able to tell that she's vanishing, even though she doesn't have eyes. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but I'm assuming that they can still see. And then we have Hannah vanishing and Henry like waking up again. We see the plague doctor standing in the hallway as well, and the camera passes through the bars of the banister, and then as it passes through one of them, he's gone. And then we have the moment that to me is just like, give it up, which is Miles waking up on the grass, and Peter Quint standing off to the side just saying, I'm so sorry, Miles, I'm sorry. And then him disappearing, and Miles looking really mad at him. And I'm just like, you are not sorry, you fucking liar. You are not sorry. You were never sorry. You were criticizing Miss Jessel for not taking you up on this 3 minutes ago. get the fuck out of here. Why did they even write that line? He shouldn't even have gotten a moment. He should have just straight up vanished out of Miles's consciousness. We should have just had Miles, like, coming back to himself and us understanding that means that Peter's gone. And I would have not been mad if there was a screaming sound as Peter gets yanked out of Miles's consciousness, and then a bunch of little, like, darkness imps, like in Ghost, coming and wrapping him up and taking him down to the underworld, because fuck that guy, he's the worst. So, Danny comes out of the water, and there's an awful sense of, like, things are not okay in her brain. She can feel something is wrong, but she's trying to focus right now on the fact that she saved Flora and that they have managed to get this taken care of for the moment. This immediate threat has been managed. So we have then the sort of montage about what happens with the rest of the family. We have Hannah's body being discovered and Owen having to, like, cope with this loss right after losing his mother. And they just decided that she died accidentally, which, like, yeah, I'm not interested in holding Miles responsible for her death. That wasn't him, so it's fine. And there's also a mention of how much, like, calmer and more peaceful Bly Manor becomes after all of these ghosts have vanished. It's so funny, though, because, like, the way that this is filmed, it's certainly purposefully a more golden, warm light. There's more light overall flooding into different areas of the house. They have really gone out of their way to make it feel more welcoming, but this place is just sinister. I'm sorry. Like, you can just do whatever you want to the light in the background. I couldn't live in a house like this. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. There it is. So Henry is, like, taking them under his wing, coping with his past. We don't ever get real closure on Henry's alter ego or Danny's ghost, which were both, I'm assuming, metaphorical. But I still would have liked a moment of, because Danny's ghost, it's just sort of like, oh, it's gone. I would have liked there to be a real moment, though, where we understood that it was gone. Because, like, when she burns the glasses, we still see it after she does that, right? It doesn't work. That, like, sort of attempt at an exorcism, which is what I keep thinking of it as. It doesn't seem like that does the trick. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I honestly can't totally remember. But it just seems like we just stop seeing him. And that's not super satisfying. I would have liked something to that signaled that it had ended, really. And then what happens with Henry's, his, like, alter ego thing, he just, like, says, fuck you, and runs away. But it feels like if he went back to that office, it would still be there waiting for him. And I would like it if we saw him coping with it at Bly, like it was following him. So it felt less like a ghost that's occupying a space and more like a thing that's haunting him personally, the way that Danny's is. And then when he gets rid of it, it feels much more significant. And this moment where he's, like, deciding finally that he's going to take the kids under his wing, he's going to assume responsibility for them in a way he's been unwilling to do. You could combine this moment and the alter ego disappearing somehow, and it would really come together for me as, like, the conclusion to that episode. To that episode of, you know, what happened with him specifically. But I was a little bit bummed that those just seems to sort of get dropped. So then we have the scene with Jamie and Danny is saying that she can feel her inside. She can feel Viola, and she compares her to this, like, beast in the jungle that is just full of rage and is like, Danny compares herself to somebody on this, like, trail in the jungle, all alone, being stalked by something that is watching her. And she knows at some point it will get her. But it's just out of sight. And she only knows it's there because she can feel it, not because she can see it. And that it's waiting. And I had said at the start of this, it could be seen as a couple things in metaphor. You could have it be depression, especially in light of the fact that it sort of ends in a suicide, that it could be the like succumbing to that in this terrible way. And the feeling that comes with depression, when she describes later how she doesn't feel like she's a part of her own life. She's watching things happen and she's aware of them, but she doesn't feel connected to them. That is a super common element of experiencing depression, is like there is a sort of like, what's a word I could use here? It's like you are wrapped in saran wrap, which is totally transparent. You can see everything, but it's not the same. Everything feels muffled. Everything feels less real, less important, less immediate, less critical. And you're aware it shouldn't. That's the worst part, I think, about depression, is that you know something's wrong. You know that you're not feeling the way you normally feel, but you can't even like get to the point where you give a shit that you don't feel right because you're just too tired. You're tired. And for me, that felt like the closest alignment for me of either mental illness or just a terminal illness. Could also be, a metaphor here. But for me, the way that she described it later to Jamie as she doesn't feel like she's a part of her own life and how tired she is. That's a major thing too. And that's something that a lot of people with mental illness will just be like, when you have depression, it's this battle that goes on like every day, all your life. And some people are just sick and tired of fighting the battle every day and they just want to rest. And I can't even be that mad about it because I don't blame you. It sucks, and it's just an awful thing. Owen's been really struggling lately because he has been working on getting diagnosed and getting proper medication and stuff. And him and I were talking about this the other day and he was like, I just want to get through it and be done with this part. And I had to be like, I don't want to make you feel worse, but you have to know it doesn't just go away. You don't just get through it. You'll do better for a while and it'll come back and then you're going to have to do this again. And I just want you to be prepared for that because that's the worst part, is that it's never over. And not everybody is built to deal with that. It's unfair. It's a terrible thing. And the whole way that she talks about this and the feeling of it being somewhere in her, waiting for her to either slip up or just in general, get tired. That felt a little bit too much like it, Let's see. Candace says, I hate the paternity plotline. It felt so over the top and extra. Agreed, Candace. I don't really feel like that was necessary at all. There's a lot that could be cut from this overall story, if we're being honest, really, the whole Danny's ghost isn't even necessary. I think it's interesting, but looking back, doesn't really need to be there. And I'll say this too, I defended the previous episode a lot, despite the fact that it felt like a little bit too much, because I was certain that Arthur and Isabel, the Viola's husband and daughter, I thought for sure they would turn up again in the story. Nope. No idea. what happened to them, anything that's like, it just doesn't, I mean, I don't know that it matters, but I would have liked some information. They just like, wander off in the sunset, and then we have like the family that we see now, and we're just meant to, connect the dots that they are related, but that's it. And let's see. Ashleigh says, according to the writers, Eddie stopped appearing at the point where Danny decides for herself that she deserves happiness. I didn't feel that. I would have liked that if it were a little bit more emphasized. Chris says, okay, so I'm late to the party, but I hated that she had to die in the end. It probably wasn't Barry or Gaze, but it was still a lesbian queer relationship ends in trauma and grief. Yeah, I'm going to get there. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. Ashleigh says, I went back and forth. I think it kind of came around. I think I kind of came around, but it does come pretty close to burying your gaze. Ashleigh says, I'd recommend having a look at the YouTuber Rowan Ellis's video, Bly Manor is Very Gay, a video essay. Chris says, also, I wanted to say I agree with Natasha way back when she said she thought Danny and her fiancé were bearding for each other at first. Would have been more interesting. Am I wrong? It just feels like we're just layering trauma upon trauma on these characters, but then we're just going to have like kids forget shit. And so it's a weird dichotomy of like, we're going to really emphasize life and how it hands you shit and you have to figure out how to cope with it. And, magical forgetfulness. Their lives are good now. What? How are you, okay. So I'm getting ahead of myself. So they have this talk, and Jamie basically is like, well, we're going to enjoy the time that we have while we have it. And they decide that they are going to go off on an adventure and maybe go to America, figure out how to live their lives. And Danny emphasizes how much she wants to avoid planning too far into the future, because Jamie mentions Christmas. And she's like, look, I want to have Christmas with you, don't get me wrong, but I'm not sure that we should be even talking about that. And there's like a sort of quality to the way she says it, like, don't jinx it. Danny feels very Owen to me in these scenes. Like, Owen and I, when we talk about our wedding, there's a real sense to him of certainty that the wedding's not going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. I will be like really disappointed because something doesn't come out the way that I wanted, and he'll be really like sad about it. Just a variety of things so he almost doesn't even want to talk about it because he's so worried something's not going to turn out. And it can be a little stressful, not going to lie. But yeah, so this, like scene where they're talking about what they're going to do for the future, it's really sweet because they're just trying to feel things out. And then we see that they have this like flower shop that they open together, and it's a really gorgeous little shop. The design of this whole scene is so like, whoever did the set design must have had a ball with the flower shop specifically. I really enjoy the way that Jamie says, I've got a problem. We've got a problem. I'm not sick of you at all. I'm actually pretty in love with you, it turns out. And I really loved this scene. I thought it was so sweet. And, I'm not, like I said, their relationship doesn't entirely work for me, their chemistry, but this scene in particular for me, really, that was great. That was good stuff. And then we see them progressing to getting an apartment together, and just the variety of things that you go through when you're a couple, creating a life and connecting. But Danny is gradually, like, she has these moments of real happiness, and it feels like that's all it is pure happiness. And then it begins to unravel. And she starts to see in reflections, instead of the being haunted by her old fiancé, now she's being haunted by the spirit of the woman who has possessed her spirit, and seeing her face in reflections, and it's awful. And I just really felt for Danny in that she can't get away from shit. She gets to have just like a few happy years, a handful of years, getting to be herself. And because she wasn't out, you know, in her previous life before she came to Bly. So she wasn't able to be herself. She comes to Bly, she meets Jamie, she fucking gets possessed by this water witch, and then she goes and has to, like, deal with it again, seeing things in reflections, having no peace. It's super unfair. And she grows more and more distant from her own life. And there's this scene where she brings home this plant. I really, really liked this. She brings home this plant that she claims to have found on the street that she wants to save. And she takes over at the stove while Jamie comes over and pulls the plant out and to see what's wrong with it. And she finds the little promise ring, the little like hand fasting ring. I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's like the two hands that are holding the heart with a little crown on it. And basically this is Danny proposing, even though they can't legally be married. And it's like, for me, it's so bittersweet because she knows things are unraveling for her at this point. But she you know, like she's trying to hold on is really what it feels like here. So then we have the scene at Owen's restaurant, a batter place. It's an odd name, honestly, for a restaurant that seems to be like focusing on savory stuff. It feels like that's the name of a bakery, because that's what batter is usually for, is like sweet baked goods. But it's fine. I'm not mad at him deciding that he's going to have a pun be the name of his restaurant. That feels very appropriate. I have to mention just how adorable he is, too. I know it's already been talked about, but he really has got that something, you know. And this is, again, when Danny sees that reflection in, I think, the, like, ice bucket. And he tells them that the kids don't remember anything. Henry remembers all of it. But I mentioned Hannah, and Flora asked me who I was talking about. It's been a while. It's been this way a while, as it turns out. And Danny says, well, if they don't remember Hannah, then they don't remember. And I'm assuming she's a little bit hurt at the fact that likely they don't remember her. And she, like, basically gave up her own life, you know? It's a weird choice, guys. I don't get it. I don't get it. I just feel like it completely undermines what the whole show up to this point has seemed to be about. And yeah, to have it be that the kids don't even remember the sacrifice that was made on their behalf, it's just kind of a fucked up thing to do. You know, like, what? Let's see, Chris says, the kids were really young. It would have been easy for Flora to repress it, but for Flora to repress it, but Miles would have had a harder time. Now that you're finished with it, have you ever read Turn of the Screw, or did you see that crap move, The Turning TJG, that came out a year or two ago? I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't read Turning of the Screw, but I don't know The Turning TJG. So no. But I had heard somebody reference Turning of the Screw in response to this show, because I think some of the names are similar and like parts of the plot are like sort of similar. But from what I heard, like the way that the show wraps and the overall theme of it isn't really the same at all. But yeah, so this is followed up by a really severe moment that Danny hasn't had in a while, of seeing the lady in the water when she's washing dishes and dropping the dish. And things really begin to escalate here until eventually Jamie comes home and there's water in the hallway. And I kind of thought we were going to find her having drowned herself in the bathtub. But she is just at the tub with her face like 2 inches from the water, staring into it. It's honestly I feel that this portion goes on too long. If we had an additional episode before all of this, where we have slightly more time for the other characters to cope with what's been happening, this wouldn't feel too long. So when I say it's taking too long, I don't actually mean it, not like in a vacuum. I mean in proportion to how little time the rest of everything gets. It's too much. But it actually is told quite well if it weren't for the fact that everything else gets such short shrift because of it. But this moment, when she is looking at the water in the tub and Jamie finds her, this is one of the more disturbing scenes to me. There's a lot of imagery in the show that's very frightening. But this got to me in a way that other things didn't really. I think because there's nothing actually supernatural except for her seeing a reflection, which Jamie can't even see. So this feels like more that we're seeing things from Jamie's perspective here, as in what happens when you come home and your loved one is behaving like this in a way that's feels really irrational. That feels really dangerous in a way that it's hard to put your finger on what you're even afraid of, and is just not like them. That's just a nightmare, especially when you can't be around that person all the time. So you're not sure if they're okay when you're gone and what you're going to find when you come home, a few days later, because it's obviously getting worse. And she winds up having to pull Danny away. And Danny's been in this weird state where she doesn't even realize what's happening around her. All the water that's been pouring out of the bathtub, she hasn't even noticed that it's overflowing. She's it feels like Viola's looking at herself more than anything. So then we have the scene where she's asleep, so she thinks, and she's laying next to Jamie, and she dreams of Jamie standing at the edge of the lake, I guess, looking down at her, and her reaching up out of the water, grabbing Jamie by the throat and pulling her down with her into the lake. And when she wakes up, her hand is inches away from sleeping Jamie's throat. And she realizes that she almost hurt her, maybe could have killed her before coming back to herself. And that is where she draws the line. She's like, oh, I don't think so. When it was just me at risk, that's one thing. You're going to try and threaten her? I'm out. So Jamie wakes up and finds a note, knows exactly what the fuck this means, and goes to Bly Manor and goes into the lake, and Danny is dead at the bottom. I feel like this is the thing. This is the thing that doesn't totally work for me. Because I guess what is supposed to have happened here is that due to the fact that Danny has sort of joined up with Viola, that she can keep Viola from stalking around and taking lives again, because it says, Viola was part of Danny now and Danny would never, because Jamie is screaming about how she wants her to take her with her. The pronouns there are a little confusing. How she wants Danny to take her, Jamie, with her into the lake. But I don't really understand how that works, because now that she's dead, it feels like she freed Viola again. Not that they would be joined still, because they're two separate souls, right? So how could she prevent Viola from doing what she's always done? And why is that still her responsibility after death? Can this bitch get a break is what I'm saying. She needs to be able to get a break. And so this felt very she killed herself to save everybody else from this being. But in my opinion, the way that we've seen this work is that it wouldn't actually have saved everybody, because her still being alive and somewhere for Viola to live is what saved everyone. Her death frees Viola again and makes her a threat again. I may be misunderstanding how this worked, but that's the way it felt. Let's see. Candace says, I think the way they did this ending might be explained when put up against the ending of Haunting of Hill House, but that's not done without spoilers. Ariel says she said at the beginning she hoped she could make a difference in just two child's lives, and that's exactly what she did. True. Chris says the premise is very similar of that movie you mentioned. Two kids, dead nanny, older guardian, and uncle. Okay, but the ending of the turning is crap. Noted. So anyway, yeah, this death of her, it felt, this is part of why I agree with the bury your gaze trope here, because it doesn't even really work that she had to die. It feels like they just wanted this to end in tragedy for the sake of a sad story, rather than really thinking through how this, like, materially could work. And I also, just from a practical standpoint, and this is something that I think they could have explored if they gave themselves another episode. If you, let's say you were possessed by a water witch who wants to eat the souls of children, whatever, would you not attempt to find literally anybody who could figure out a way to exorcise that from you after all of this was like calmed down and you had gotten away from the manor? It doesn't feel like Dani pursues any like action to free herself. And I really would have liked to see that. And of course, there's no time for us to do that in this episode. But I wanted to see it. I wanted there to be a bit of like an attempt. And Jamie, who is a hugely practical person, I think that would have been her idea. I think Jamie would have been like, well, this thing is in you. We'll find a way to fucking get it out. The kids are safe. They're away from Bly. We don't have to worry. The house is empty. Fuck it. We'll figure out how to get her out of you. You saved Flora. That's all we need to worry about. But instead, it's treated like, well, I did it and I can't undo it. You don't know that. You haven't tried. Nobody has ever seemed to like do the invite them in before. And you figured out how to do that. So there's no reason that there's no way to get them out again. Because that seems like something that you change consent, you withdraw it, that the bitch has to leave. I think that should be part of the deal. So anyway, that for me, the fact that she kills herself, it just felt unnecessary, and thus it felt more like a kill your gaze trope. And the fact that we literally have Jamie underwater screaming, reaching out for her body and unable to like swim all the way down to reach her. It was just, it was so melodramatic in a way that felt like unearned in such a short time in this episode. However, I do enjoy the callback as we find out later that this is why Jamie is filling up the tub and the sink with water and just looking into them. She is trying to catch a glimpse of Dani. It's a weird thing, because I don't know why she thinks she'd be... The reason Dani could see the lady in the lake was because she had her inside her. When she looked into a reflection, that's what was there. She wasn't just seeing some external thing in the water. Why would you think this would work? But it's a thing that they wanted to do because they wanted to have there be some sort of ritual. And they also wanted there to be, I think, the symmetry between the opening scenes where Dani has a reflection that she's avoiding, trying not to see, and Jamie has a reflection that she's desperate to see. And, the way that the two of those things work. I don't feel like it's really worth it for that, because that doesn't make sense. It just does. I mean, and it's been like by the time this episode ends, I think it's meant to have been like 10 years since Danny died. Get therapy. I'm saying 10 years. You need to not be doing this anymore. This is not a healthy way to live your life. You know, I really liked the conversation that she has with older Flora about loss and about the way that you remember somebody at unexpected moments, little things that are sometimes really stupid that remind you of that person. But then to like see that she's still living as if Danny's going to walk in any second was just sad. It didn't feel like a beautiful story of moving through grief. It felt like somebody who is stuck in time and hasn't moved forward with their own life at all. And again, it's a sort of like unconscious, apparently, like the show doing this, hey, trauma really fucks with you and sticks with you and you sometimes can't get past it thing. But then they have the kids just forget everything. So I don't understand what they're trying to do here. It's weird. And it feels like Jamie coming to the wedding and telling the story is her kind of trying to like remind Flora of what happened. Again, why does Flora not remember her? Doesn't make sense either. There's just a lot of things here that it doesn't feel like they were thought out completely. It doesn't feel like anybody really understood. And it wouldn't bother me so much if it weren't for the fact that we have an episode previous to this that's an origin story that explains so many things. So it feels like the show is very conscious of wanting to explain when they feel like it. If it were a show where things felt a lot more vague in general, and it sort of seemed like they're just trying to get you to feel something and give you an impression of something, and how it works doesn't matter as much, that can be hard for me personally because I like things to like make sense. But I recognize that's a limited way of seeing things, and I try to let go of that and be aware of that being part of art. But that doesn't feel like what's happening here because they are so like bent on explaining other things. It just feels like they're inconsistent about it. Does that make sense? It feels like they like bring things up and drop them, or something like this. For me, this means that Viola is still out walking the grounds of Bly Manor, I'm assuming. I don't, like, Danny isn't part of her as she stalks the grounds anymore. And what about the trunk? That's what I thought Jamie was doing. I thought Jamie was going into the lake not because Danny was dead. I thought she was going in there because she was the one telling the story as we begin to like sense. And I thought she went into the lake to drag the trunk out and that she was going to burn it. That she was going to do something to it. That it was going to be a final way of like handling this thing. And so we just have Danny's body at the end. The trunk isn't there. I don't know if it's meant to have decomposed and it's just like a metaphorical trunk. It would have decomposed. Let's be honest. If it had been dumped in a lake, like literally would have. But otherwise, Danny died for nothing. Viola's still out there. It just feels like kind of a slap in the face. Let's see. Ariel says, leaving the door open a crack and sleeping on the chair every night is just insane. Agreed. Again, she needs therapy. Ashley says, Danny dies in 2000 and the wedding is in 2007. The main story is happening in 87. Okay, so it's been 7 years. That's enough time that really this is worrying. You know, I feel 5 years is really, when this kind of behavior falls within that parameter, for me, it's really understandable. You get past 5 years and you're still obsessively doing this every night. And it has never worked either. That's the thing for me. It's not like this has worked once before. And so she's trying to like recreate something. It has literally never happened, but she's still doing it. You know. Candace says she suffered from plutitis. She knew this writing was bad and it kept her up. Oh God, Candace. It's just a shame because I loved the first 2/3 of this season. And I even did like the last episode. I just felt like the placement was wrong and the way that they handled it was wrong. But this finale, it's got elements that are really interesting, but it feels like they gave so many people so little consideration, and just the lack of fanfare of Hannah's disappearance. The fact that she doesn't get to even speak to Owen other than they need you at the lake before she vanishes is baffling. I don't understand why they would do it that way. There's just a lot that they took the time to set up, and then they didn't give it room to breathe later on. And so I'm like, why did I get so invested in that if you guys weren't going to give me anything there, you know? But the whole thing with Danny struggling with this ongoing possession, that's a fascinating concept, you know? And it's sort of a reflection of what happened with the beginning of the season, with her kind of being haunted, even though that was metaphorical because it was due to guilt. It's still a similar idea. And I would have loved a whole episode of her coping with that, trying to find people to help get it out of her and it failing, and eventually figuring out a way to separate her and Viola. There's no reason we can't have a somewhat happy ending here. She can suffer, and that is a sacrifice that she was willing to make without dying. And the death just feels to me like it would have the opposite effect of what she intended based on the mythology and the lore of this place that we have learned. So all of that sort of contradicts each other. So yeah, I don't know. This is the kind of thing that if I wrote fanfic, I would write one for this show and fix this, because there's a lot of pieces here that work, but they just didn't quite have it. And it's also weird that it's 9 episodes instead of 10 when so many Netflix series are 10 episodes. Just have it be 10 episodes. You needed that episode. That's not something that you say often about 10 episode Netflix series. Oftentimes you're like, this could have been 6. This is so bloated. Not here. They needed it. So yeah, but I'm really I really did enjoy the series as a whole. It's just the ending is particularly frustrating. And I didn't expect to enjoy something that was so spooky on such an emotional level. And the scene where Flora is saying to her that she doesn't know how she would cope if her, fiance died, I felt in my fucking bones. I talked before on the show on how I have this constant fear of Owen dying in an accident or something, and me never getting to say goodbye, or even worse, something happening and me never knowing what happened, him just disappearing. And her expressing, she was very good in that scene. Also, somebody told me that she is the girl who played Renesmee on Twilight, which is insane. So I'm just going to wrap up with dropping that little piece of information there. All right, guys. Well, thank you all again so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the coverage. Thank you again to Ashleigh for commissioning this. And I will be seeing you again shortly with sex education. So stay tuned for that. All right? Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.